not eaten.
Really?
Yeah, we are
I
live.
thought you were going to wait a couple seconds.
I did wait a couple seconds.
What?
That wasn't very many seconds at all.
A couple is
What,
all right. Well,
You mean we're live? Are we live or not live?
We're live. Yeah.
I know we're live. There's a little orange thingy.
Yeah.
Right. I haven't prepared myself. I haven't done my voice. I know we're live. This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story once a week. I'm Gerald.
Hey, I'm Andy.
And I'm Anais.
Hey, we're all here. And this week, in an effort to break free of my Carve magazine-like rut, I've been delving into the page of Granta magazine for a slightly strange story called The Smart House of Mrs. O by Lincoln Michel. Or this Lincoln Michael.
I think it's Michel, right?
I would have thought so.
Yes.
But not Michel like the girl's name. It's
No.
Michel.
Probably
Like
just call him
French
Linky.
Linky also. He does
Linky
not go
Michael.
by, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Oh, maybe he goes by Link, though.
He could be listening, you see. You've got to be careful here.
I hope
But then he should let
Link.
us know. Does he or does he not go by Linky? This is perfect. He does not go by Linky. All right.
He might go by
You
Link.
sure? Link.
If my name was Lincoln, I'd have people call me Link.
Link. Hey, Link. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's The Smart House of Mrs. O by Lincoln Michel. If you haven't read the story, pause the podcast, read the story, scratch your head, and then come back to us. We follow Amanda, our first-person protagonist, as she breaks up with her boyfriend who wanted time to himself to write a novel. Who'd do that? And then got sick from the mold in his apartment. She moves into a new apartment in a small house owned by a strange old woman, Mrs. O. She's a bit weird, but she's a technology whiz and starts making some technological improvements to the house, which includes voice activation with the voice response of her late husband, which is a bit strange. During a power outage, Amanda sees Mrs. O rushing down the road to collect ice because in her room, she has the dead body of her ex-husband, except she'd been taking bits off him to keep him alive or something.
That's the story. That's your summary, I mean.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you get into the part where like Amanda goes in, finds all of like the body parts in the house, in the apartment that she couldn't get into before, and then the police are involved, and Amanda's a little defensive of Mrs. O because she's like, well, she might have been, creepy, crazy, macabre old lady, but she's a genius. Give her a Nobel and Nobel. Sorry, I keep saying Nobel now as a joke, and I need to stop for when I'm actually on a show like this, right?
On TV.
On TV. Is it TV? It's YouTube. We're on YouTube TV right now.
You see, I do a summary. I don't read the blooming story out to people. It's a summary, and it's supposed to be an intriguing summary, so people think, wow, that's an interesting story. There's lots of stuff I'm sure he's left out. I'll go and read that for myself.
We're about to get into all of it though, because this is a spoilers-filled show.
Right, we do discuss the story in the next part.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We don't read it out as a summary from the beginning. We discuss it.
Though I should say, fair warning to everyone listening and watching. Andy and I haven't eaten yet today. Although I never eat before the show, so I'm only pretending like that's like.
Oh, I always eat before the show.
I never do. All right. Yeah. Okay, so should we just get into it then, with our hangry self?
Yeah. Hey, Anais, what'd you think of this story?
I really, really, really liked it. I thought it was awesome. I love the gender blending and gender bending that was going on with an L and without an L, bending, blending, both. I thought it was really good.
That was a thing that happened?
You didn't think so?
Tell me more.
There was a clear moment where it just like turned for me, where the story was like, this feels like another kind of literary, like the coastal, like fiction written almost like in a memoir kind of style or essay style, right? Where it's kind of like the neuroses of young people on the coasts, right? And like there's a lot of stories that are just that, and then like end with like, and then she did or did not get back with Charlie, and that's how it's set up, right? But this one all of a sudden goes, and then human teeth came out of the speakerphone or whatever. I forgot exactly where it turned. And then it's like, oh, okay, never mind. Right? Like there's always like
that's gender bending.
Genre. Did I say gender?
Genre.
I said gender. Man,
I was very confused.
No, genre.
I was
Sorry.
confused too.
Genre bending and blending. I don't know why I said gender. Maybe I
I know
should
I'm
be.
sometimes a bit
today.
slow to see the hidden messages in stories, but I thought that's a good one.
I've only had one cup of tea instead of my usual 5, so yeah. Yep.
All right, so to confirm, genre and gender are two different things.
Two separate things, yes. Although I was confused about the protagonist's gender for a while because I kept doing that thing that I do where if it's in first person, I almost always assume it's the author's gender until told otherwise.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a story where the protagonist was a gay man until they said Amanda, and I was like, okay, that's not usually a unisex name. Okay, got it.
Yeah, I thought the same thing at first, and then I was like, okay, but then just the way she went out with her girlfriends before they said her name Amanda, I was like, well, maybe it's a lady, and then they said Amanda.
No. That's anyway, not necessarily, but okay, yeah.
No, not necessarily, but there was something about it.
Yeah. Okay. So I liked it with its genre bending and gender ambiguity for 2 seconds, and then he tells you. Yeah.
Wow.
What about you, Gerald?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed a lot about it. And the second time I liked it even more. Yeah, it was quite a cleverly put together story. I think it was engaging. So yeah, I basically liked it.
Okay, and Andy?
Yeah, I thought it was super great. One thing I know last week I was talking about how we had a story that was ratcheting up the tension every step of the way, but then ended in a hope and not a big scary reveal. And this one did exactly the opposite of what I liked last week, but I still liked it, right? Mm-hmm. It was ratcheting up the tension every step of the way, and then still did exactly what I expected to happen, right? Don't go in my apartment. I was like, well, okay, her dead husband's in the apartment. Oh, the house speaks with her dead husband's voice. Yeah, because because she's got her dead husband wired into the house. Oh, her dead husband's in the house. Yeah. But then it did an emotional flip, right? Like the story did all of the beats, but then, right, it wasn't horror though. It was hey, look, this kind of has the shape of a gothic horror thing. Oh, I'm a young lady in this new house, but I can't go in the forbidden zone. And the previous spouse has died mysteriously, and there's no record of his death. Right? It did all the steps of it, but now I'm just fuck, poor Mrs. O. She has missed her husband really a lot, and she's a nice old lady.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? She was lonesome. She didn't want to be alone in the house, and she missed her husband. She missed, the bit about when they had the barbecue of the very strange sausages. I'm not quite sure about that. And she said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to have to learn how to do this." So there's lots of sort of parts like that you sort of felt sympathy for her, and in a way you didn't feel horror, or you didn't. You just think, oh, it's a shame. She's a bit strange, and
okay, you guys got sucked in with the moral relativism like that. Okay, it's a little frightening because it's funny to hear you guys be like, you have a lot of sympathy for Mrs. O, and I'm like, kind of.
Well, she didn't kill the guy.
That's the one saving grace. If she had killed the guy, that goes out the window. So the fact she didn't kill Harold is a big part of why we're willing to accept.
Do we know she didn't? She didn't. He didn't die.
We don't know for sure. Well, no, it wasn't reported, but his abdominal wounds were consistent with being hit by a car.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not maybe she hit him with her car and then wired him in the house, but probably he got hit by a car, and then instead of reporting it, she's like, I know.
Yeah.
I know what I can do.
Although the whole the reason why she didn't report it is because the lease is still in his name and stuff. I'm like, doesn't stuff go to the spouse if there's no will? That was oh, that's a little flimsy, but okay, sure.
Yeah. Especially his Social Security. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. I guess if it was Social Security and not his pension, if it was a pension, that would probably go to him.
It would go
It
to her.
all depends, but
Yeah, it was a little bizarre. I'm like,
right, the lease for sure would go to. Well,
Yeah.
we don't.
Yeah.
Do we know what state it's in? Yeah.
they're in New York.
Anyway.
We know they're in New
Yeah.
York. They're in New York City. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Anyway.
There's a little bit of like scammy dead relative, keep him alive for the money, but it's mostly the other thing. Also, she was using the money to buy electronics. Also, parts of him were still alive, so I think that would hold up. If parts of him were still alive, he wasn't all the way dead.
So that'll hold up in court, you think?
I think you can make a real good argument.
So, you know what's funny for me? Because hearing you guys talk about what Andy was saying, which was you get all these horror elements that are like being dropped in, but then at the end, the surprise is you aren't left with that horrified feeling. You're actually supposed to be sympathetic to Mrs. O. And it's funny you say that because once things started to ratchet up into the horror department, even though that was sudden, it didn't feel jarring. It felt, like he had given us just enough. The author had given us just enough earlier in the story where like, okay, even though it kind of like turned real quick, it wasn't jarring. But you know what was jarring to me? The sudden moral relativism paragraph out of nowhere because I was not expecting that. I was like, oh, okay. That's not where I thought this was going to go at all. Like, she's actually a genius if you think about it. Why is everyone giving her a hard time? And it's like, okay, sure. Okay, Amanda, whatever. I mean, I'm kind of in the middle on that. Like, I'm not as sympathetic as it sounds like you guys are. I'm like, you have a good insanity plea here, but that doesn't mean she's not insane and what she did wasn't bad, right? Like, what she did is still bad. You could maybe
parts is parts.
For a while.
But
parts is parts.
And if we assume that she didn't kill him, then what's she doing wrong? Just,
a lot.
I
feel like, well, this is more, if you're asking what is she doing wrong in terms of the law, we can go figure that out separately. But in terms of like the morals that as human beings, we all tend to live with and agree with, right? Like respect for corpses and bodies is a big part of that, right? Because like it is.
Do you think she wasn't being respectful?
I don't know about putting human teeth in an intercom.
Well, that's so she could talk to him.
Oh my God. She made his ears into brooches.
So that he could always hear her.
Oh my God. You see how increasingly this is a case for an insanity plea?
Well, did it work though?
Yeah.
Anyway.
If it didn't work.
Well, it depends on what you believe, right? There's a big question at the end of, was she actually integrating his house into his body into the house? Right. Or was
the cop says the bits were just decorative.
Yeah, they were decorative. She was skinning things, which is,
she just built actual computers because she was good at, and
which is still impressive.
Put some body parts around.
Yeah,
but it's like a talismanic. It's a totem. I don't know. I'm with her.
Yeah. Okay, so what was my next? I feel like we've discussed about that crazy genre bending turn. So we already also discussed. So so you guys are sympathetic to Amanda's defense of Mrs. O as a genius, then.
Also, like, I'm super sympathetic to like, no, the body parts actually helped, even though the cop was like, no, they didn't, because fuck the police.
Also magic.
Yeah,
I'm going on record.
Yeah, there'll be a knock on your door in a minute. But and also, I think you have to admire what she did. She was very clever. So, in an abstract form or an abstract point of view, what she did was very clever. So you can admire that without getting into the moral discussion.
I guess, but it's like we've had a lot of crazy mad scientists. The thing here is it feels very cleverly, it was set up to feel victimless. She didn't kill someone. She wasn't bringing in other dead bodies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was just she was just sort of keeping him alive in a way, or trying to keep him alive and trying to keep him part of her life. And he and the voice says, it's getting a little cold. Don't forget to put your coat on. So the voice, whether it was attached to the brain or the body or whatever, that was still looking after her. So he didn't feel unkind towards her.
Right.
the body
But
parts.
you believe the magic part of it, that the brain was actually behind the speech.
Maybe.
Prove
it was.
The other thing that's kind of like missing from classic like mad scientist, horror story, not only is she blameless, but like I don't get the impression that Smart House Harold is suffering in any way, right? He's not a victim either. He's not like tormented by his new existence as a house,
Right?
Which would have been right if it was a pure kind of horror story. It would have been she's bad and he is hurt somehow by this, but like no, he seems all right with it. There's some weird adjustments, but he's like, oh yeah, okay, I'll draw the bath for you. Hey, don't have to yell, but he's not tortured.
That's true. And also, it's funny that you mentioned, Harold adjusting to his new existence, because there was a point where I thought it was going to go more ghost story, where when Amanda was like, did she actually murder him? And his house his spirit is haunting this house. And now because of all of these smart house improvements, he's like using that like kind of poltergeist style to like re-exist in some way. And I was like, ooh, that'd be fun. But that's not what happened. It was creepier than that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Worse.
Yeah.
Way worse.
And also that I'm not sure I would like to be Amanda in that situation. It's a bit creepy. It's a bit weird. It's a bit unpleasant. So I don't think I'd like to be, from her point of view, I wouldn't like to be in that situation where someone is building her late husband into the house in some way. It sort of wasn't done in a nice way. It's the teeth was a particularly unpleasant thing. So I don't, yeah. So in that respect, I think she, yes, I think Mrs. O wasn't being as kind as she could have been, or she could have explained to Amanda or something. I don't know.
She made blueberry scones.
Yeah, she did.
And fixed her laptop and left her cookies.
True. That had eyes in it looking at her. Well, it wasn't eyes, it was raisins. But there was a lot of spooky analogies and metaphors early on just to like prime you for the twist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, one thing that's funny, that this is more something that happened to me personally while reading the story that I don't think most readers will, well, maybe some, but basically when she was first describing Mrs. O before the twist as this like energetic older woman who like does all these projects around the house and everything, I was like, oh, Mrs. O reminds me so much of my grandmother, which was like a horrifying thing later when Mrs. O, I'm like, nope, never mind. She does not remind me of my grandmother. This is awful. But like a quick personal anecdote, just a few weeks ago.
Your grandmother built your grandfather into a house?
No. But she like repainted the entire basement and like a section of the backyard patio by herself. She's 76. She's going to be 77 in November. Okay. And then the next day, my mom had called her and my grandma was like, oh, she's super tired. And she's like, so, and my mom calls me and says, your grandmother sounds really fatigued. Can you like check in on her and see, that's a symptom of COVID? And I'm like, mom, she like repainted everything yesterday while I was like working. I had no idea until I come down, everything's repainted. Because I live in a duplex. I'm on the top floor, like similar situation. Like I live above, she's downstairs, right? And my mom's like starts laughing. She's like, so she's just repainting everything on her own. I'm like, yes. So this reminded me so much of like Mrs. O, right? Or like vice versa. Mrs. O running around just like doing these home improvement projects. Oh, my goodness. And then this happens. So maybe it's a cautionary tale for me.
Yeah. You never know.
Energetic old ladies.
Watch out.
Yeah, watch out.
Don't you love them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I'm saying that was more of a personal thing for me, a ride. I'm like, oh, she reminds me of my grandmother. No.
Woo. Row back on that.
Yeah. But, going back to the Amanda part of this, Gerald, you were talking about how, like, if you were Amanda, this would be horrible. And then there's, like, a whole thing with Amanda's, like, side plot. Like, most of the stories about Mrs. O in the house, but then it's like she broke up with Charlie, and she's online dating, and then she goes on a date with Rupert, and there's all these parts of it. How did you guys thematically link those two things?
I don't know.
Andy? Eddie?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I could see the emotional ties, right? But right, because it's about Mrs. O and her husband's deep relationship, right? How close they are and how inseparable that bond is. And that's not how Amanda feels about either Charlie or Rupert.
Right. And also Mrs. O is always telling Amanda, like, in a couple places she says, oh, you should find someone. You shouldn't get old and alone like me. You shouldn't wind up old and alone like me. And Amanda's trying to put herself out there, but is sort of disappointed by the selection of men that are out there. The description of Rupert should have come with a trigger warning for me. Like, being in the New York City area where she describes Rupert as a finance bro who wanted to talk about exercise routines and pretty edgy stand-up comedians. I was like, no. This should come with a trigger warning. I can't right now. Oh, man. Yeah. It's kind of hard, I think, a little bit. Like the thematic links are sort of there, but I don't feel that either story really drives the other one at all. Like I don't think Amanda's view about dating is necessarily changed by what happens with Mrs. O or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
Now there is that sort of parallel in that she's trying to find a man or a partner without success, and Mrs. O has had the partner and wants to keep him. So there's that whole sort of, get a man, keep him sort of thing, and stick with him. And but she's trying, but she can't. She just finds weirdos.
Yeah, I mean, Rupert's not a weirdo, but Amanda just doesn't necessarily want that. It's not. There are a dime a dozen here. They're running around with their sleeveless Patagonia vests, picking up trust me, it's like a whole thing. Like
really,
that they're common doesn't make them weirdos, or doesn't not make them weirdos.
They're not weirdos, but they're
they're deviations from human norm. They're not what they should be.
It's funny. There's an entire Instagram out there that's just for it's just candid photos of finance bros in the wild, like ordering coffee at like a cafe, but you can identify them by the way they like cluster together and the way that they dress. It's really funny. Really? Very New York Instagram stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then there was one other thing that I wanted to talk about, which was the black mold motif that kept happening. Charlie had a huge black mold problem that made him sick. And then Amanda thought that there was black mold in her apartment. There wasn't, but she thought there was. And then in Mrs. O's apartment, there was dark spots on the ceilings and walls, which made me think of black mold. I couldn't fully tie this in, though. The only thing I could bring the black mold into was it was an effective motif for kind of putting you in a spooky mood right from the start, without necessarily being spooky in the beginning, right? Like, okay, that's a thing that happens and then it gets spookier. But I don't think black mold makes people go insane, right? I looked it up too.
Really?
I think that's a thing.
Right. And also, like, I don't think there actually ended up being black mold in the new apartment.
No, but it was a fear that she was already bringing with her. I think that motif effectively just helped put things in an eerie, kind of spooky, decaying place. And also, it's the fear that Amanda was bringing with her, along with some other baggage.
And I suppose mold is like a living organism within a building. So maybe it's that sort of trailer type thing. Maybe. Yeah.
I thought it was effective, but I don't know if it necessarily informs the theme, but it does inform the mood, the suspense. It brings about certain fears. And it makes the spooky reveal of Mrs. O's apartment that much spookier.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm trying to just go through my notes and see what I'm missing. I think everything else has to do with prose. So what did you guys think about just the writing of the prose, the pacing? I thought the pacing was great, but anything else about the story, things that jumped out at you?
For me, nothing jumped out at me, and that, I think that's a good thing. I like the fact that the writing doesn't get in the way of a story, and only afterwards you can think, there was some. It was. It's kind of hard to It wasn't over literary. It wasn't it wasn't too flowery. In fact, it wasn't really flowery at all. It was very descriptive, but carried the story really well all the way through it. And like you, I thought the pacing was great.
Yeah. What about you, Andy? Anything that popped out at you?
Yeah, well, like Gerald, specifically, nothing popped out, which it was really good throughout. And sometimes I like the little right. It didn't have any of my like little clever favorite lines, like, oh, this one made me smile or laugh, or I like the way this sounded in my head. And it didn't have any of those, but also a lot of times the stories that do end up being like too clever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just it was very nice and smooth.
I'd agree that it's smooth. There was a few things that popped out at me though. Like for example, and it's not so much like clever turns of phrases, even though I was triggered by that Rupert line. It was pretty clever.
The finance.
I was also triggered by shitty underpaid jobs with overeager bosses. Having been in those, not my current situation, but like, yeah, in New York specifically. But that's just more personal to me. But no, there was a lot of really like, again, just the way he would put something in, like the human teeth thing. You do not expect human teeth at all. And it comes out of nowhere in a way that's really grabbing. Or when for her birthday, for Amanda's birthday, Mrs. Oak gives her the brooch that's an ear. And she says, you can bring Harold with you wherever you go now. And it's really disturbing, right? Like, isn't that line so disturbing?
Yes.
Written so simply. And the thing is, if you replace Harold with Alexa, it's like a commercial, right? You can bring Alexa with you wherever you go now. The thing that makes it creepy is this like dead husband connection, right? Like that's the whole creepy thing. But like we already live in a world where someone can say to you, you can bring Alexa with you wherever you go. And you're like, oh, okay. Right? You're like, sure, why not? Right? Or Google Assistant goes with you wherever you go on your phone. You're like, all right.
Have you ever seen the Alexa factory at Amazon? Just
don't know.
They just got all of Jeff Bezos' ex-husbands.
He only has one ex-wife, but I don't know if anyone's heard from her in a while.
Right, so someone should check in.
Mm-hmm. But I also thought one thing I noticed on my like second skim through, really like make sure I didn't miss anything, was as the story got more suspenseful and eerie, as it started to turn, the paragraphs got really short and punchy, which I thought was really effective. It will give you one visual or one smell. Like she walks into an apartment, the smell is 2 lines, next paragraph, right? And I thought that was really effective.
Yeah, it does. It does speed up and then it slows down after the cops get there, kind of.
Right. Once you're out of the suspenseful, then again, longer paragraphs explaining things.
Yeah, structurally, that's very clever.
Yeah, I thought it was very clever. I like that. And if you're
so dark. I'll open up the curtains.
That's what he means, definitely. We need more lighting. For people who listen to just the audio version, we're responding to a comment from a listener saying the show is so dark. We're gonna open up curtains.
Yeah, I think we've got to be careful not to turn into a horror story podcast or something.
This was a horror story, though.
It was, yeah, I know.
A horror story of love.
I didn't know. I didn't read it, so it is what it is.
I like when we do horror on this show.
Yeah, I think it's a nice sort of it just like a little punch, a little sort of jarring punch to wake you up, and this is something a little bit different.
What was the last one we had that was the creepy creepo bit? It had a person exploring a place that was getting creepier. Was it what we read last week?
No.
Everything
there was
together.
that section in Bortaint. Yes. Do you mean the house?
The house, the creepy house.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I wouldn't describe it necessarily as a horror.
No, but there was that little creepy section. And so just once again, this story is much better than the Red Tower.
and both Bortaint and this story, that suspenseful exploration of a creepy setting, it's because you're in the protagonist's point of view and you're getting freaked out with them, instead of that robotic camera moving through and be like, and then there's gravestones.
Yeah, take that, Thomas Ligotti. Learn to character.
There were no characters in the Red Tower unless the Red Tower
Right.
itself is a character, right? Like that.
No, it's not, and there should have been, because then it would have been a better story.
Yeah.
Bang.
Okay.
not letting
Don't
this
listen
one
to our
go.
discussion of the Red Tower. I defend it more than I do here. Okay. So are we ready to rate? I've gotten through my notes.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a hard one.
There's
Okay,
your
I
pick,
can-
Gerald.
Yeah.
5.
5.
5?
Just a 5.
That
Yeah.
a 5.7? You want a
Just a
5.3?
Nope.
Okay.
Just a
I just wanted to make sure.
5.0.
I know how much you
5.0.
like your decimals.
I do like my decimals, but it's just a 5.
Andy?
Yeah, I think a 5. I think this is a very nice 5. It's guess it was just
Nice.
right. It was just real smooth, and it hit all of the notes I was expecting. Once it showed me what sort of story it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't. Right. It once you knew. Okay, it's the building creepy story. It didn't do anything different than what it was. Like, obviously, after we found the teeth, we knew where the husband's body was, right?
Yeah. I mean,
And
yeah, there's a good guess.
right, but like, and it didn't deviate from that pattern, but like, it did it smoothly, and then it deviated emotionally, but not in plot, right? It's I don't know. It was soothing.
Very good.
Yeah, it was good. I'm also giving it a 5. And again, we rate from 1 to 6. And as I've said before, for me, a 6 is I must have other people go read it right now, which I didn't quite get to that point, but it's super good. Yeah. Okay. I think it's awesome, and everyone should read it. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but no one in particular.
I couldn't think of anyone in particular. I did talk to my boyfriend about it because he's here, though. So, that's good.
Yeah,
And it was over 5,500 words, which is quite a substantial short story, and yet it didn't feel that long to me.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good sign that you're not wading through it and looking at your watch and seeing how long it's going to take to finish. It was a good read.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Granta.
Yeah, it was good. Granta's pretty good. It's a pretty good well for us.
We've had some very strange stories from Granta.
I was going to say the only time, but it was actually probably one of our best podcast episodes ever. But the only time where Granta started screaming was Delira. That's the only one where we're just like, that's the pornographic one we didn't know was essentially porno. That was great.
Yeah.
That's when Robbie was like, he's like tapping out. He's done. Yeah. Okay. So we're not doing a game this week because we're done with games. Done.
Okay.
Too much sound editing, and we just keep resubmitting them anyway. So instead, we're going to read Andy's selection for next week. So Andy, what are we reading next week?
we are reading The Afterlife, or perhaps The Afterlife, by Jonathan Lethem.
Okay. But before you go, engage with us and support our podcast. Should Mrs. O be forgiven for her genius? Share your judgments of the brilliantly deranged with us with us online on any of our social media profiles or our website. Just Google us. All right. And remember, part of the reason why Mrs. O preserved her husband's corpse in a vat is because she was afraid of financial ruin. So help us avoid Mrs. O financial planning strategy by supporting us on patreon.com/literary roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with the finance bros in your life. Until next time, read a good story.
Read a good story.